bara för allas information så är det nu livestreamas från och med nu. Så ni får fortsätta prata som innan.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Välkomna denna afton. I will start in English and then later on we switch to Swedish. So it's a great pleasure and honor to have Professor John Wyatt with us this evening. And as I said, he's a professor in neonatology in London, and a well-known author of several books, and engaged very much in ethics. I think that your professorship is in neonatology and ethics. So please, John, come here and give your speech.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to be able to talk to you this evening, and as you've heard, my background is in clinical medicine as a neonatologist caring for very sick and newborn babies, but increasingly I've been involved in ethical debates both at the beginning and the end of life, and also with new challenges, with new technology, of biotechnology, and of artificial intelligence, which are many of the new challenges that I see coming. So this is a very old issue, but it's also still a very important one. And in fact, this is the concept of mercy killing has been around for many thousands of years. It's not a new issue. The word euthanasia, euthanatos, was deliberately chosen as a euphemistic and nice-sounding phrase, literally meaning good death. But what it actually means, and the best definition, is intentional killing as part of medical care of a patient whose life is thought to have no value. And if you go back into the ancient history of the origins of medicine, and the healers, in many places in the ancient world, the person who was the healer was also the killer. The person who had the skills to heal would also have the skills to kill. And it is said to be, it's still the case, that in many African villages today, there is the medicine man. And if you are sick, you go to the medicine man and he will give you herbs. But if you wish to get rid of your rival, you also go to the medicine man, who will give you poison in order to get rid of someone. And therefore you never totally trust the medicine man. And when he gives you these herbs, you're always left with the possibility that someone else might have got to him first, and these are not genuinely in your interests. And so, back in the history of Greece, we're talking in about 400 BC, they developed a completely new form of healing, which was based around the sort of semi-mythical figure of Hippocrates, and it was a guild of pagan physicians who took a solemn oath to say that they would use their skills only to heal and never to harm. And part of the Hippocratic oath was a solemn oath that I will not give poison to my patient, even if such a plan is suggested. And it was part of the oath that they would never use their skill to heal and to harm, only to heal. And in fact, the Hippocratic group of physicians remained a relatively small and obscure group until the early Christian church came along. And it is said that if it hadn't been for the Christian church, nobody would have heard of Hippocrates, apart from a few specialists in Greek history. But what happened was that the early Christian church found that the philosophy and the practices of the Hippocratic physicians matched with Christian thinking. And so this was an alliance between the pagan Hippocratic doctors and the new Christian carers, and this was called the Hippocratic Christian Consensus. And they adopted and Christianized the Hippocratic Oath. And so instead of swearing by various pagan gods, you now swear by Almighty God. And then the oath continued. And that consensus continued really until the middle part of this century. And it's only then that this agreement that physicians should only be involved in healing and not involved in killing started to become apart. And in fact, the UK was one of the first places in the world to consider the legalization of various forms of mercy killing. And this was being discussed even in the 19th century in the UK. And the particular group that was being considered, the group of patients, was actually children with learning difficulties or disabilities, whose lives were thought to be not worthy of living. And it was suggested that a killing chamber, filled with poison gas, would be used to cleanly eliminate the lives of these unfortunate children. And this was being openly discussed. Some doctors were supporting it. It never became practice, it never became legal in the UK. And then there was the terrible episodes in the Nazi Germany in the Third Reich, and the euthanasia program. And at the Nuremberg trials, Dr. Brandt, who was the head of the euthanasia program, claimed that he was motivated entirely by compassion, that his whole aim was to compassion for these poor people whose lives were not worthy of life, particularly people with learning disabilities and so on. And so it immediately tells us that to talk about compassion as a motivation for killing is a very slippery and dangerous concept, because your compassion for me might lead to my death if you decided that my life was not worth living. And so after the Second World War, there was a really silence on euthanasia. Suddenly goes silent in the West, and it's not discussed until the 1960s. And in fact, it was Netherlands who really then starts to pioneer and develop euthanasia as the first Western country. And in the Netherlands, the concept was of legal necessity. And interestingly, it was framed as a problem for doctors, that the doctor had an absolute duty to prevent suffering, but the doctor also had an absolute duty to protect life. So then what happens when the doctor is confronted by a patient whose suffering is totally unbearable, that it cannot be sustained, it's unsustainable, but also there is no possibility that their suffering is going to improve? What can the doctor do when he has an absolute duty to prevent suffering? And so the argument was that confronted with that situation, the doctor had no choice but to kill the patient. And they argued that this was the legal doctrine of necessity. And still to this day, that's why the law in the Netherlands is framed that euthanasia is only legal if suffering is hopeless and unbearable. So unbearable is of such severity that it cannot be tolerated, and hopeless, there is no possibility of it being improved. As I'll come to briefly at the end, this never, although euthanasia started to be practiced in the Netherlands, it never happened in the UK. And the reason it didn't happen in the UK, as we'll come back to, was the work of Cicely Saunders, a Christian doctor who pioneered a completely new way of caring for dying people, which became known as palliative care. But despite this, there is still continual pressure in the UK for the legalisation of euthanasia. Throughout my medical career, there have been constant debates going on in Parliament, constant attempts to introduce euthanasia. At the moment, the law governing doctors is exactly the same as the law governing everybody else in society. And I, for one, am extremely grateful of that. I'm extremely grateful that doctors are covered by exactly the same law on homicide, on killing, and on assisting suicide, as exactly the same law as everybody else. Doctors don't have a 00 prefix, as in James Bond. They're not licensed to kill. They are treated in exactly the same way. Now, of course, what is proposed in euthanasia legislation is that doctors will be a special category. Doctors will once again be allowed to kill and to help people to kill themselves. But despite the resistance, in the UK we still have continual campaigning, and as the statistic says there, 86% of disabled people support. So there have been many public surveys about euthanasia, and remarkably a very significant majority of the British population support a change in the law. And this is, again, one of the fascinating things about this field, and that is, if you just stop people in the street and you say, do you think there should be a law to allow people to kill themselves if they've got desperate suffering? Or do you think there should be a law so that doctors could help them to die? The vast majority of people say, of course, absolutely, I definitely think there should be a law like that. But interestingly, the closer you get to people who are actually involved with dying people, the more people are not in favour of a change in the law. So if you take doctors as a whole, doctors are much more resistant compared to the general public. And if you take palliative care doctors who deal with dying patients every day of their life, in the UK, less than 10% of palliative care doctors are in favour of the law. So paradoxically, the closer you are to the actual situation of caring for dying people, the more people are opposed. It's a kind of strange paradox. It's perhaps something we can come back to. Anyway, the other thing to notice is the language here. So this organisation used to be called the Voluntary Euthanasia Society, and in the 1990s, and then before then it was always a rather disreputable and poorly regarded organisation. But in the 1990s it had a complete makeover. They hired brand consultants and they changed their name to Dignity in Dying. And now it's very well supported. It's, for instance, it's got considerably more money support for compared with most medical charities. And their sole aim is to get legalised euthanasia in the UK. And as we know, euthanasia does seem to be spreading across many countries. In Germany, there are plans to change the law. Spain has already passed a law. Austria has. The Netherlands is the place where the most medical killing is taking place in Europe. And as you can see, there is a steady rise in the numbers. And there doesn't yet seem to be a a plateau being reached. This is Oregon, the state of Oregon in the USA, and this is important because I understand Oregon is being used as the model for a possible law here in Sweden, but in fact there are all sorts of problems, as we'll hear about, what's going on in Oregon, and the statistics are very stark in that they don't show any evidence of a plateau. They show this steady year-on-year increase. And in Canada, again, there's a different name here. This is now called Medical Aid in Dying, although it's really talking about something that is absolutely identical to what's happening in the Netherlands. And in Canada, nearly all the deaths happen by intravenous injection of a lethal combination of drugs. And as you can see, there's been this steady increase, again, year on year, in the number of people who are dying as a result of euthanasia in Canada. What's happened in Canada, and we'll come back to it, is particularly troubling. My recommendation is that if you want to look at an international example of the risks of euthanasia, Canada is far and away the best analogue of what might happen here in Sweden or in the UK if euthanasia was legalised. And the reason for that is that Canada has a national socialised health service which is funded by the government, and it's very similar in the sense of having a very strongly bureaucratic, legalised, highly regulated kind of healthcare. In that sense, it's very different from Oregon, which is much more unsupervised, and similar to the Netherlands, which has a huge emphasis on individualism. But what is happening in Canada is really very disturbing, as we'll come back to. So it's clear that there is a pressure in many westernized countries for the legalization of some kind of law, either for euthanasia, intentional killing by medical personnel, or assisted suicide, where the doctor is involved in assisting the process, calculating the lethal dose, obtaining the lethal medication, explaining to the patient how exactly to take the lethal medication, including, if necessary, various instructions to make sure they don't vomit or so on. But the doctor holds back from the final act. It has been suggested in patients with motor neuron disease or so on that the doctor would insert an intravenous cannula, would connect up to a syringe driver with the lethal medication inside, but the final act would have to be the patient. The patient would have to press a button, or even, would you believe, an eye blink, so that they could, do you really want to die, yes or no, blink twice, and that's it, bang. I think the other thing that is very important to understand, which many people don't, and that is the drugs that are used in euthanasia are completely different from the drugs that are used in palliative care. When the euthanasia doctors first decided to try and kill patients, they didn't know how to do it. It wasn't the sort of thing you get taught in medical school. And there were a whole series of very grisly experiments when doctors tried various ways to kill patients cleanly. And they included things like giving massive dose of insulin, injecting air into veins, inhaling poisonous gases. But eventually they found a way of killing patients quickly and cleanly. And the way they do it is they use a very old-fashioned drug called barbiturates in a massive overdose, between 50 and 100 times the therapeutic dose. And when this is given intravenously, it causes instantaneous anesthesia. And it's often then combined with another drug designed to stop the muscles of respiration. So patients literally die on the end of the needle. And the important thing to understand is that those drugs have no place at all in palliative care. Palliative care doctors, their intention is not to kill, but is to treat symptoms. And so you can tell the intention by the drugs that are chosen. And the drugs that are chosen for euthanasia are very clearly chosen to bring death rapidly and painlessly and cleanly. So what is driving this? And I think there are two fundamental factors which are driving this demand for euthanasia. And the first is increased fear about suffering, difficulty, hardship, pain at the end of life. And what's interesting in our society is that we have lost the belief that anything that involves suffering, that involves hardship, that involves pain, that involves difficulty, we've lost the belief that it could have any kind of positive or redemptive consequences. All pain and suffering is seen as entirely negative, futile, destructive, and pointless. And so, for many modern people, their desire is really just to avoid the pain and the suffering. It's interesting that seems to be true across the whole of modern life, except for one area, which is the gymnasium. So in the gym, everybody knows no pain, no gain. You've got to feel the burn. You've got to really suffer and struggle if you ever want to improve. And of course, we also know that all human development depends on struggle. If you just think about how a child learns to walk or to speak or any normal cognitive development involves a huge amount of struggle and frustration and perseverance and pushback and so on. And yet, for modern people, that concept has been lost, not just about the end of life, but for the whole of life. Any kind of struggle or suffering is regarded as completely futile and damaging and pointless. So for many modern people, it seems like the greatest possible good is anesthesia. And what you hear someone say is, just put me out of it, doctor. I don't want to know anything about it. I just want to be obliterated. And this longing not to experience anything unpleasant. The same, it often happens with relatives. Relatives also are terrified about any kind of struggle or having to watch someone become dependent or struggle. And therefore, there's often pressure from the relatives. Why can't you kill him? Why can't you put him out of it? Just put him to sleep. We don't want to, we can't bear watching it. So anesthesia becomes the greatest good. But then, second to that is the idea of choice and control. So for many modern people, they find it utterly outrageous that here in the beginning of the 21st century, I can control every other aspect of my life. I can control where I work, how I spend my time, how I spend my money, who I live with, who I marry. I can control absolutely everything in my life except this one thing. I cannot control the time or the manner of my death. And they think that is outrageous, that is ridiculous. This is the 21st century. And I think a lot of this drive is what the philosophers call autonomy, autonomos. I make my own rules, literally. That I think a lot of this drive is coming from older people, the baby boomers, of whom I'm one. And baby boomers have lived their life controlling everything. And they've done very well out of it, both of them. And now they're getting old and they're getting frightened about dependence, and they're getting frightened about illness and death. And they are demanding control. at the end of life. I want to be able to die and at my own timing. I want to be able to stage manage the process. I'm going to have a great party. I'm going to have various songs. I'm going to invite them all, and then I'm going to say good night, friends. I'm leaving the stage. It's not surprising that one euthanasia society is called Exit, and I think it just comes from the stage. You know, I've said my final lines. Exit, stage left. And so this is being this idea of the noble suicide, of a heroic, controlled, stoical, I decide to take my life. This is being rehabilitated. It was the pagan way to die. Again, if you go back before the Christian era, suicide was often fated as a noble and honourable way to die. And it was really only with the advent of the Christian era, and eventually when the Christian ethics became incorporated into Western civilization, that laws against assisting suicide started to appear. And the idea that suicide was not a noble act, that it was an act of destruction, of self-harm, gradually became upheld. And it's almost like we're going back. Not only are we going back to when the doctors are the killers, but we're also going back to when suicide is a noble and an honourable way to die. And so therefore, it's all about choice and control. And if you were to go onto the website of many euthanasia societies, certainly in the UK, you won't see anything about killing, you won't see the word suicide. What you'll see are words like choice and control at the end of life. It's all about, I have the right to choose to control my own life. But of course, it's not as simple as it sounds. We all know, those of us who work in clinical medicine, know that although choice sounds like a great slogan in a politician's speech, or in the philosopher's chair, when you're actually sitting with people who are affected by disease, or by depression, or mental health issues, it's not as simple as it sounds. And I'm often trying to work out genuinely what is the person's wishes in this. Are they being coerced? Is the effect of the disease affecting their thinking process? Are they being coerced by relatives? By other friends or other forces in society. So, and the whole issue of mental illness and depression is very central, because it's well known that suicidal thoughts, the desire to kill yourself, is an absolute classic feature of clinical depression. In fact, it's one of the diagnostic features. And therefore, how can you ever know whether this person with terminal illness who just keeps pleading to be killed and saying, I just want to die, are you sure that this isn't some form of depressive illness? And therefore, how do we work out whether or not this person has a genuine desire to kill themselves? And this is very close to home to me, because a number of years ago, when I was working as a neonatologist, I had a major psychiatric breakdown, an acute psychotic illness, which came on largely because of very long and severe stress from my work. And I ended up in a locked psychiatric ward in the deep psychotic depression. My head was just filled with a desire to kill myself, to end my life. And it seemed like the logical thing. It would put everyone out of misery if only I could just no longer be here. And thank God someone didn't turn up with a piece of paper and just sign here and we can sort it out for you. But instead I was met with love and with therapy and with medication and with compassion. And gradually, over the next few weeks and months, these suicidal thoughts went, and I realized how precious life was and how grateful I was for the love and compassion that I received. But so there are real concerns though. For instance, already now in many jurisdictions, people are receiving euthanasia because of mental illness, people with depression, untreatable depression, people with anorexia nervosa, people with transgender and gender dysphoria are receiving euthanasia, people with schizophrenia and with dementia, with Alzheimer's disease and so on. So this is a very real challenge and difficulty. And of course we must always recognise the social context in which this is being forced. Of course we all know these realities about an ageing population, a rise in loneliness, family breakdown. There are so many older people who are lonely and say that they often have no social contact, close social contact with other friends or family members, sometimes for weeks and months in end. There's rising economic hardship and increased costs of health. There are many older people who fear becoming a burden, being a burden to other people. And so it's precisely these elderly and lonely people who are vulnerable to subtle and coercive pressures towards ending their lives. And the way that the pro-euthanasia lobby presents it, it's always presented as a kind of just individuals making their choices, choosing how to live their lives. But of course the reality is that we are in a very complex social context in which there are all kinds of subtle pressures. My conclusion is that euthanasia is not the right way, and I love this quote by H.L. Mencken, American journalist. There's always an easy solution to every human problem, neat, plausible, and wrong. And I think that's exactly what euthanasia is. It seems so neat, it seems so plausible, it seems that it's going to solve the problem for us. But the easy solutions are not the right solutions. And by contrast, as we'll hear more about palliative care really is the very positive answer to euthanasia. But palliative care is expensive, it's costly both in terms of money, but also in terms of resources, in terms of people, in terms of facilities. To do it well is a significant involvement, and this is the attraction of euthanasia. It's so quick, it's so easy, it's cheap. Think of all the money you're going to save. So just moving on rapidly, what are the practical risks and dangers? What might happen here in Sweden if you passed a law to allow it? Well, we've already talked about the rise of cases, but in particular, there's a lot of concern about euthanasia cases involving people with dementia. As we all know, dementia cases are rising, are common, it's causing a great deal of concern about the future. And the obvious solution to many people is to find a way of legalizing euthanasia in this patient group. And this is already happening. So significant numbers, particularly in the Netherlands, but also in some other jurisdictions, Belgium and elsewhere. And there was a terrible case just recently reported, about 2 or 3 years ago, in the Netherlands, where there was a lady who had a horror of dementia, that she might develop it later on, and so she had written an advance directive and signed it that said, if I ever develop dementia, I wish to be killed, to have euthanasia. And this was signed and witnessed in front of the doctor and so on. And then she did develop Alzheimer's disease. She was admitted into a home, but in fact, most of the time she seemed quite happy. She had days when she had bad days and got cross and said, why doesn't people kill me? And then other days when she really seemed quite happy. And the doctors and the relatives asked her repeatedly, would you like us to kill you? You said that you wanted that to happen, and she said no. I don't want to be killed. But then at other days she seemed very distressed and confused, and the relatives and the doctors felt that, well, we've got to follow her wishes because that's what she wrote when she was in her right mind. And eventually it came to a day when the relatives and the doctor held her down forcibly while she resisted, pushed them away, and they injected the lethal injection and she died. And this was reported to the courts and went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court upheld the doctor and said they did the right thing because it was clear that this was her original wish to be killed. So it just shows you the kind of issues and problems which with dementia may happen. What's clear both in the Netherlands and elsewhere is this constant desire to extend the grounds in which euthanasia can be the legalised grounds. So it includes children and newborn babies, people with different kinds of psychiatric illnesses, as we referred, people with dementia who have written an advanced directive, but also, amazingly, in the Netherlands there is now a lot of pressure for doctors to kill patients at their request, older people who say, I'm tired of life. I've lived my life, I've had a good life, but frankly, I'm tired of it. I don't want to carry on. And it's your duty as the doctor to kill me. I want to be killed. And there has been a lot of pressure and campaigns, pressure on the doctors. So far, the doctors in the Netherlands have refused this, and they've said we will only do euthanasia where there is a medically diagnosed problem. And if somebody is medically healthy but tired of life, we will not do it. But how long they will resist, given the amount of public pressure, and given the fact they're already doing euthanasia in other cases, will be not known. In Oregon, the commonest reasons given for obtaining lethal medication were less able to engage in activities making life enjoyable, loss of autonomy, burden on family, friends and caregivers. So isn't it interesting that although in the debates that we hear, it's all framed in terms of terrible agony, people in terrible agony, just sobbing in pain, actually pain doesn't feature as the overwhelming reason why people, and it's often to do with this sense of the loss of control, fear of dependence, and also a worry of being a burden on others. And as we've seen previously, the statistics show a consistent rise. In Canada, when the initial medical aid in dying bill was passed, it allowed euthanasia in people who were 18 or older and who were mentally competent, and the law said that they had to be suffering from a serious physical health condition and in an advanced state of decline, and someone whose natural death was reasonably foreseeable. And the courts didn't define those words, and what happened then was a succession of legal challenges and people pushing the law to see whether they could do euthanasia in wider and wider groups. And eventually, in March 21, about 5 years later, an amended MAID bill was passed by the Canadian Parliament, striking out any requirement to be terminally ill, allowing patients with chronic disabilities to receive euthanasia. And in 2024, the bill is going to be enacted which allows people with psychiatric conditions alone also to receive euthanasia, if that's their wish. One of the other things we mentioned in the meeting earlier today in Parliament was so-called organ donation euthanasia, which is now happening. This was originally proposed as a sort of slightly bizarre thought experiment back in 2012 by some medical ethicists. You know, isn't this a kind of win-win? Because here's somebody who wants to die, and there's a huge shortage of transplant organs. So if we could arrange the euthanasia to happen in a controlled way in hospital, we would then could ensure that we could have really fresh organs which could be transplanted into needy patients, and therefore it's a win-win solution. And this is in fact happening. It's happening in Canada, where euthanasia is now the source of a significant percentage of organ transplants. And it's also happening in other countries. There's been some recent debate in the ethics literature. So what about people who want to die at home? Is it possible for them to donate their organs? And the answer is yes. What we do is we anaesthetize you at home. So you have all that nice stuff at home with the candles, and you have the relatives, and you can sing your last song, and it's all stage managed. And then you go to sleep. But we don't kill you, we just anaesthetize you. And then we transport you to hospital anaesthetized, admit you into the operating theatre, and then we kill you in the process of removing your organs, because at the same time there are other operating theatres with transplant patients waiting to receive the organs. And this is already happening. So, what are the risks and uncertainties? Well, it's pretty obvious that there are a whole lot of series of risks, and these risks are all well known. The Oregon law says that you must have 6 months to live, and it's only legal if a doctor certifies that you have less than 6 months to live. Well, anybody who practices medicine knows that predicting life expectancy in patients is completely hopeless, and we all get it hopelessly wrong, and there are many, many examples that that's happened in my own clinical experience repeatedly. And yet, there's this kind of myth out there among the general population that doctors are incredibly sophisticated in predicting how long people are going to live. What about the wrong diagnosis? We thought it was cancer, and they went ahead and had euthanasia because it was all hopeless. And then unfortunately, at the post-mortem, it turns out it wasn't cancer at all, it was something completely different that had a very good prognosis. It's a bit late now because they've been killed. So you can just see the kind of potential for medical mishaps and disasters. What about risks from the supply of lethal medications? As was described, these medications that are used are completely different from the normal kind of painkillers, or things like opioids and so on. And yet, these supplies, for instance in Oregon, the doctor prescribes the drug and explains how to get the drug, but the doctor cannot be there when the patient actually takes the drug. So nobody actually knows whether they took the drug or what was going to happen, whether these drugs are going to circulate in the community, whether children are going to find them, whether they're going to be sold on, whether they're going to be used to kill somebody else. What are the implications of having quantities of lethal poisons circulating in the community? What about ensuring a clean death? Well, unfortunately, it turns out that particularly when lots of people, they don't like the idea of having an injection. They much prefer the idea of taking something by mouth. That seems much more gentle and controlled. But unfortunately, for medical reasons, it often goes wrong. And the patient might vomit or aspirate the drug. And there have been a number of cases where people have woken up, sometimes hours or days after having taken the so-called lethal drug. Sometimes patients have had permanent damage. What do we do now when someone had a failed attempt at euthanasia? Is it our medical responsibility to finish the job properly, or do we now resuscitate the patient and put them in the intensive care unit? You can see again the kind of complexities that causes. What about abuse by relatives? Well, unfortunately, this is by no means uncommon, and you can see the kind of subtle manipulative pressure which relatives could put on. I mean, many elder people, their estate is worth millions of euros. Can you imagine the relatives saying, yes, well, Granny, you've had a great life and we're really very grateful, but don't you think now, you don't want to waste all that money that you've saved your life, wouldn't it be more altruistic, wouldn't it be more loving for you to agree to euthanasia so that the money could be passed on to your children, so that the children can remember you and love you. So you can just imagine the kind of the subtle and the dangerous manipulation. What are the effects on doctors and health professionals? Well, perhaps it's not surprising that there is clear evidence of mental health issues for the doctors who do the executions. Many doctors who have post-traumatic stress disorder and other painful difficulties, And some doctors who are just find it impossible, medical students who say, I simply cannot go into the profession because I'm going to be involved in killing patients, and this is totally abhorrent to me on the basis of my conscience. The other sad thing, though, is that if you talk to doctors who've done euthanasia, they say, you know, the most difficult one is the first one. The first one is horrible. But, you know, by the time I've done 20, you get used to it. So, you know, what are the implications of that kind of hardening of medical profession? And is the person who's done 20 killings going to be that keen to resuscitate the next patient, going to work that hard to save someone's life? So what is the effect on the medical profession? And why is it the medical profession are the ones who do the killing? You could argue, because of the history of medicine, that if society says we want to legalize killing, then the doctors are the last people who should be doing the deed. And surely it would be better for society to set up a separate group of qualified euthanasiologists and train them in how to kill people cleanly and quickly. I think it wouldn't take very long. 3 months course is quite enough to treat anybody off the street how to kill someone cleanly. It's killing people is not difficult. It's keeping them alive that is much more problematic and challenging. And yet, no country in the world has gone down that route. Every single country has said it's the doctors who must do the killing. And that's because it's the doctors who are trusted. It's the doctors who have the highest levels of trust in society, and we don't trust anybody else to kill us but our nice, friendly, loving family doctor. And again, you can just see that strange paradox. And then finally, in almost every legislation where this has happened, there's been a push, an incremental extension on the grounds, because the legalized grounds have no logical consistency. So if you say you're only allowed to kill someone with a life expectancy of 6 months, why 6 months? What about this person who's in terrible agony but they're going to live for 5 years? Surely you could say their need is far greater than someone who's going to die anyway in a few weeks. And if you say that it's right to kill somebody who's in terrible agony in order to stop their pain, why on earth can't we do that to someone who is not competent, who has no mental competence, but is still suffering the same pain? That's outrageous to say that you can only kill someone, well, as long as they've got mental competence. And yet, as soon as they haven't got competence, are you saying their agony doesn't matter? Are you saying that we can't be compassionate to them? And so you can just see how this constant challenging of the legal rules is going to happen. And then, and finally, and I'm coming to the end, the social consequences of legalizing euthanasia. It's very easy to ignore how extraordinarily widespread there is in society is a resistance to suicide. Every doctor, every police officer, every paramedic, every social worker is taught about how to identify people at risk of suicide and to take steps to prevent it. Suicide prevention is seen as an absolutely essential part of a way a modern and healthy and compassionate society lives. And what is often presented in the pro-euthanasia lobby is a vision of society where we are all independently autonomous individuals, where we just choose our lives, we make our own path, we make decisions. But of course, in reality, that's not true. And I like this phrase, resistance to suicide is part of the glue that binds us together as a society. If you were walking down the street and you saw someone on a bridge planning to jump, are you going to say, oh, go on, jump, what difference does it make? I mean, you clearly don't value your life. Or are you going to say, well, I don't know who that is, it's just a stranger, so they don't count. The instinct is that what you do, even though I don't know you, matters to me. What I do matters to you, because we are locked together in society. And this is part of the glue that binds us together, that we look out for one another, that we don't encourage people to kill themselves, that we try and persuade them that their life is valuable. And so this is expressed beautifully in this poem by John Donne, very well known. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as any manner of thy friends, or of thy own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And then, so just finally, whenever we are going to say that something is wrong, of course, we have to recognize the terrible truth that many people do die in pain. They die with inadequate care. They die abandoned. They die alone. They die distressed. And what is the answer to that? The answer is not euthanasia. The answer is really, goes back to this amazing lady, Dr. Cicely Saunders, a Christian physician in the 50s in London, and who, together with a bunch of pioneers of doctors and nurses, developed a completely new way of caring for dying people. And one of her greatest insights was this, the idea that a person who's dying has much more than just physical pain, but there's what she called total pain. So yes, there's physical pain from the disease processes, pressing on nerves and so on, but there's also psychological pain. There's anxiety or depression, worries, or there's ideation, negative thoughts going through the mind. And then there's relational pain or social pain. Often people are worrying about relatives, or they're worrying about the broken relationships. I'm going to die. The last conversation I had with my son was 20 years ago, and we had this terrible argument, and he stormed off, and I've never seen my son again. And now I'm going to die, and I'm never going to be reconciled. Or spiritual pain, fear of what's going to happen when I die, guilt, or meaninglessness. Is this what life is all about? And what palliative care doctors say, that actually the physical pain is the easy pain. It's the other pains that are much often more complex and require much more attention and care. But if you can address these kinds of pain, very often the physical pain resolves and is not the issue. And yet this concept has not really penetrated. This is such an important thing to understand. What is the nature of pain at the end of life? And so she said, palliative care develops as a reaction to the attitude, there's nothing that can be done for you. How often you hear that? It's hopeless. There's nothing that can be done. And there's this great quote from Robert Twycross, this is never true. There's always something that can be done. And so in palliative care, the aim is not to accelerate the dying process, nor is it to impede it, to keep people alive. The aim is to allow death to occur according to natural purposes and in its own time, whilst we focus on maximising the quality of the person's experience and the well-being over the last hours and days of life. And as Cicely Saunders said, you don't have to kill the patient in order to kill the pain. I'm going to stop there just to mention this book, which I'm very grateful that has been translated into Sweden by colleagues here, and also some other books. I also have a website, johnwyatt.com, if you're interested. It's got quite a lot of resources in this area. I have a book on dying well, which is trying to give the positive side about how to help people, particularly with spiritual pain, to die well. And I'd also have a weekly podcast, Matters of Life and Death, which you can find on any Apple or Spotify or any of the podcasts. So I do this with my son Tim, who's a professional journalist. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Enormous contribution, and we will continue. And I welcome right now Mikaela Luthman. And Mikaela, you are an expert in internal medicine and hematology, as well as working as a consultant in palliative care and at Stockholms Sjukhem. So we change to Swedish.
Behöver jag? Ja, för inspelningen.
Oh, sorry.
Man kan ibland tro när man diskuterar ibland kan man tro när man pratar om dödshjälp att de flesta sjuka människor vill dö. Det är inte alls sant. De flesta sjuka människor vill bli friska. De som ber mig snälla hjälp mig att få dö, de kan räkna på ena handens fingrar efter 20 år i palliativ vård. De som tigger och ber om mer cytostatika, mer behandlingar, hjälp mig att få leva, de är väldigt, väldigt många. Utifrån den här erfarenheten som jag har, väldigt lång erfarenhet av livet nära döden, så har jag skrivit en bok som inte är tänkt som ett inlägg i dödshjälpsdebatten, utan det är en bok som handlar om döendets vardag. Men jag hoppas att den kan ge lite grann motvikt mot den här synen att det är viktigt att hjälpa människor att dö. För vad vi vill göra i palliativ vård, det är att hjälpa människor att leva. Och det som jag har mött av död, både på akutsjukhus, där jag jobbat många år, på långvårdssjukhus, där jag jobbade som ung sjukvårdsbiträde, det heter inte det längre, men då fanns det. Och framförallt i palliativ vård, det är utgångspunkter för den här boken. Och erfarenheter och möten som har givit mig en stark egen tillförsikt inför slutet av livet. För jag vet att det finns god hjälp att få den sista tiden. En omhuldad tes i samtal om döden är att vi talar inte om döden, eller döden är undangömd. Kan ibland kanske tyckas lite paradoxalt när man ser det enorma utbudet av deckare där folk dör fruktansvärt hela tiden. Men det vanliga samtalet, att vi vågar prata med varandra om att vi ska dö, det är inte lika vanligt. Philip de Croix har skrivit en bok som heter Boken för dig som en gång ska dö, och han skriver där: även om vi lyckats flytta fram döden har vi inte kunnat avskaffa den helt. Däremot försöker vi i vår tid hålla den på en replängds avstånd. Den irländska gastroenterologen Humone, som har skrivit en bok som heter Så dör vi, västvärldens sätt att förhålla sig till döden. Han säger: döden är för de flesta människor ett rykte, något som händer andra långt borta. Vi palliativmedicinare, vi brukar ofta säga att alla vet att de ska dö, men ingen tror på det. Till och med ordet död förskräcker. Vi säger inte att någon dör, utan den går bort. Eller ännu värre, den somnar in. Det är lustigt att när jag pratade om det här i morse, så kom jag tillbaka till jobbet och då hade en av våra patienter precis dött, och sköterskan som hade varit med där, hon var helt uppfylld av hur fint det hade varit. Så hon återkom hela de där timmarna som var kvar tills jag gick hem, om hur glad hon var att hon fick vara med och att det blev så fint, att det blev så bra. Hela familjen kom men hon sa också att patienten hade gått bort. Man ska framförallt inte säga till barn att någon somnar in, för då kommer de inte våga gå och lägga sig. Barn är väldigt konkreta och därför gäller det att använda rätt ord. På den palliativa avdelningen hade en gammal kvinna dött, och hennes dotter tyckte att det 5-åriga barnbarnet borde gå in och se mormor. Flickan ville inte, hon var väldigt rädd, men alla försäkrade henne att mormor var så fin och inte alls så konstig ut. Och det var sant. Och till slut så gick hon försiktigt in, kikade mellan fingrarna i dörröppningen, och så vände hon sig glädjestrålande om och sa: men huvudet är ju kvar. Man hade sagt till henne att det är inte riktigt mormor som ligger där, det är bara kroppen. Och i hennes värld var kroppen härifrån och inte härifrån. Så att hon hade trott att hon skulle få se en huvudlös kropp och var ju naturligtvis livrädd för att gå in. man ska använda rätt ord, inte bara när man pratar med barn, utan jag tycker att man ska våga säga att någon dör. Men jag stöter inte sällan på vuxna människor som aldrig har sett en död person och av rädsla för hur döden ska se ut vill att deras anhöriga ska läggas in på sjukhus när slutet närmar sig. Idag dör människor långsammare och vid högre ålder än förr och många stöter av naturliga skäl aldrig på döden i sin närhet, på gott och ont. För rädslan för döden är utbredd. En av mina patienter har berättat att sedan hon fick cancer har många slutat höra av sig. Besöken och telefonsamtalen tenderar att avta när man diagnostiseras med en dödlig sjukdom. Inte av illvilja, men av rädsla. Dels rädsla för påminnelse om den egna döden, men dels också rädsla för att inte veta vad man ska säga till den drabbade. Det är väldigt lätt att säga fel saker, tror man, men det som är mest fel är förstås att inte säga någonting alls. Jag brukar fråga den som är svårt sjuk och vet eller anar att snart är tiden ute om han eller hon är rädd. Svaret blir ofta inte för själva döden, men vägen dit. Och det som skrämmer på vägen dit är oftast smärta. Jag tror då inte att det är så enkelt. Det är inte bara vägen dit som skrämmer, för döden i sig är skrämmande. Det är ju någonting som vi inte vet någonting om. Hur den ska te sig, vad som kan komma efter, kan vara förskräckligt att tänka på. För den som är ung, frisk och stark, likaväl för den som är gammal, sjuk och svag. Sorgen över allt vi ska lämna, allt vi inte får vara med om när vi dör, bidrar också. Och när den sista tiden är här, då är det i själva verket ofta inte smärtan som är det värsta. Nej, det som döende patienter pekar ut som det värsta symptomet, om de får en lång lista att välja på, det är trötthet. Den terminala, förlamande tröttheten som inte går att vila bort och som vi i sjukvården är sämre på att behandla än smärta. För det vill jag ge alla som en gång ska dö till tröst. Smärta går att behandla. Om man blir skjuten i knät eller drabbas av en hjärtinfarkt eller njursten eller tarmbred, då kan smärtan vara helvetisk. Men förhoppningsvis får man snabbt vård, dock inte palliativ vård. Att majoriteten av oss som sitter här någon gång kommer drabbas av svår smärta är jag övertygad om. Många har säkert redan gjort det. För smärta, mer eller mindre, ingår i människans villkor och den är livsviktig, bokstavligt talat. Om vi inte känner smärta när vi lägger handen på kokad platta kommer vi inte att ta bort den förrän det börjar lukta bränt med förödande konsekvenser. Att vi kan känna smärta ska vi faktiskt vara tacksamma för. Vilket dock inte betyder att vi inte kan och ska behandla smärta. Behandla smärta är lika viktigt som att antibiotika behandla en svår infektion, operera bort en tumör eller en sjuk blindtarm och dialysera en svår njursjuk som väntar på transplantation. Smärta gör oss trötta och missmodiga, ger en ständig påminnelse om sjukdom och hur vi än försöker är det svårt att inte bli griniga och besvärliga för omgivningen. Om inte annat så tar jag emot smärtlindring för närståendes skull. Det är svårt att se på när en älskad vän lider. Jag vill absolut inte påstå att vi i den palliativa vården alltid lyckas med fullständig smärtlindring. Däremot vill jag absolut påstå att vi alltid kan göra det bättre och att vi mycket ofta når mycket långt. Den döende människa som har svår smärta har nästan alltid råkat ut för feghet eller okunskap hos den som ska hjälpa. I allmänhet tyvärr en läkare som inte vågar ordinera den dos patienten behöver. Kanske av rädsla för att påskynda döden. Vilket är ytterst osannolikt att man gör. För det behövs väldigt höga doser för att ta livet av den som är van vid morfin och liknande preparat. Jag tror snarare vi påskyndar döden genom att lämna patienten i smärta. Och även om så vore att morfinet skulle förkorta livet, vad är ytterligare några minuter, timmar eller kanske till och med dagar värda och smärtan är outhärdlig? Nej, morfin till den döende dödar inte. Och att sprida kunskapen om smärtlindring, att hjälpa kollegor i andra specialiteter ge adekvata doser, liksom att sprida kunskap om andra symptom i livets slut till sjukvården utanför den palliativa världen, är jätteviktigt. Döendet är verkligen vardag för mig och mina kollegor i palliativ vård. Det slår mig ofta när jag träffar en patient som är svårt sjuk första gången. Det kan vara någon som fortfarande har ett litet hopp om att cellgiftsbehandlingen eller en operation ska, om inte bota så, åtminstone förlänga livet. Ibland är det någon som helt har resignerat inför det ofrånkomliga. Men det som för mig är vardag är för henne totalt omvälvande. Något som vänder upp och ner på hela tillvaron, som får värderingar att omprövas, vännerna att prövas, det som tidigare varit så viktigt att minska och till sist helt förlora sin betydelse. Medan för mig är det ett jobb, ett otroligt viktigt jobb. Att göra vad jag kan för att underlätta för henne kommer jag inte försumma. Jag kommer engagera mig, kanske också komma henne nära. Ibland så nära att jag förstår att om vi hade träffats i ett annat sammanhang hade vi kunnat bli vänner. Men ändå ett jobb, vardag. Livets slut kan vara så fint, sorgligt. Ja, visst kan det, för att citera Hanne Kjöller från en ledare i DN våren 2020, vara väldigt sorgligt om gamla morfar eller farfar dör. Men inte en tragedi, som det ibland sades under värsta pandemihysterin. Att få ett slut som den gamla man jag för några veckor sedan fick följa till slutet tillsammans med kompetenta sjuksköterskor och annan ASIH-personal och hans underbara omtänksamma familj. Det är en ynnest. Det är en ynnest att få vara med hos de här patienterna. Få lindra deras symptom, få stötta dem, få vara kvar hos dem. 9-åriga sonsonen som helt naturligt rörde sig kring farfars säng sa några ord då och då och så gick han och lekte. Det var jättefint att se. Varje gång jag får vara med om det i min vardag så blir jag lika tacksam. Precis som den sköterska som var med idag och var så uppfylld av det här fina som hon hade fått vara med om vid den här patientens dödsbädd. Men självklart är det inte alltid lika fint. Symptomen är ibland svårare att lindra eller, vilket inte sällan är fallet, vi får inte ge den lindring vi skulle kunna ge. Många är så tappra eller de vill inte störa, de ringer inte i onödan. Men även när vi inte når fram till symptomfrihet så finns det alltid något att göra. Och om det inte blir bra så kan det ändå alltid bli bättre. En man kommer jag aldrig glömma. Han hade ett långvarigt alkoholmissbruk bakom sig. Hade perioder varit hemlös, hade tappat kontakten med sitt enda barn. Han hade fula cancersår, besvärlig värk. Med dagliga såromläggningar och allt högre morfindoser fick han ändå en dräglig vardag. Han ville verkligen inte vara på sjukhus, men på slutet blev han ganska rädd. Och när han var mycket nära döden, inte åt eller drack längre, men hade fått mer ont, så skulle han få en läkemedelspump med smärtstillande men också sövande medicin för att hjälpa honom mot den svåra ångesten. Innan pumpen kopplades så bad han om att få en sista cigg. Så vi tittade på honom, sköterskan och jag tog fram en cigarett och tände den och hon kopplade pumpen. Och så gav jag cigaretten till honom. Det blev inte så många blås, men både han, sköterskan och jag njöt av vartenda ett. Det som var så viktigt i hans fall, och som jag egentligen tycker är det allra viktigaste i sjukvården i allmänhet, men kanske palliativ vård i synnerhet, det som vi ska ge våra patienter, det är att inte överge dem. Du kanske inte personligen kan vara med hela tiden, men det måste finnas någon att lämna över till. Allra helst som i vårt arbete ett team av människor som alla känner patienten lite grann, mer eller mindre. Att inte överge och att behandla var och en som den person den är, det är för mig essensen i vården av de döende. Och jag säger som John Wyatt, jag har också böcker som man kan få köpa om man vill.
För den här personliga erfarenheten som betyder så mycket. Det blir så mycket levande. Och vad jag har förstått så är det ju både du, Mikaela, och du, Anne-Berit, som har varit författare till en nordisk bok. Ni har skrivit lite olika kapitel. Och den har du också med dig. För det är ju så, det är bra att vi får tips på olika böcker som vi kan läsa. Så välkommen upp Anne-Berit Ekström. Anne-Berit, du är ju barnneurolog och habiliteringsläkare, docent. Och kommer att prata om Oregon-metoden.
Så. Den på nu. Bra. Just bra, eller är det alldeles för burkigt ljud? Bra. Mm.
Så, ja, okej, thanks. Jag skulle behandla lite om Oregon-modellen och den korta tiden vi har till förfogande säger ju att det kan inte bli någon riktig djupanalys. Men precis som Jovanna sa så fick Mikaela och jag den stora förmånen att vara med och skriva ett kapitel som heter just... Do I have to push? Okay. Okay, I can use this one, yes. En nordisk antologi. Kapitel 14 så har vi ett kapitel om Oregon-modellen. Så att jag kommer att dra lite av de viktigaste punkterna, men jag rekommenderar varmt att läsa den. Och den här boken skulle vi gärna vilja rekommendera er att faktiskt läsa. Det är djuplodande. Den är skriven av flera författare. Flera av dessa är inte kristna, men det vi hade gemensamt var att alla hade vi en stark vurm för att dödshjälp vill vi inte ha legaliserat i Norden. Mycket duktiga författare. Och jag har tryckt upp lite korta blanketter. Den här boken finns nämligen tillgänglig fritt att ladda ner på nätet. Så jag har flera sådana här, så ni får gärna ta med er sådana här och sprida till kollegor och så vidare. För den här är väl värd att läsas både för de som är för dödshjälp men också mot dödshjälp. Så man får en mera tyngd och mera argument för eller emot dödshjälp. Jag kommer att lägga de här lapparna här nere. Ja?
Mest mot.
Mest mot, det kan vi väl säga. Så, läkarassisterat självmord då. Varför vill vi ha detta i Norden? Varför har detta kommit upp med Oregon-modellen? No, it's not working. Yes, I thought. Oh, now it's done. Okay. Det som har varit är ju att praxis i Benelux-länderna har ju varit ganska skrämmande. Och när då Oregon-modellen infördes så tyckte man att det här var säkert en bra och säker modell. Den borde vi kunna införa här hos oss. Och den bygger ju då på ett läkarassisterat självmord och det är den mest kända modellen för detta i världen. Oregon-modellen då, som den egentligen heter, The Oregon Death with Dignity Act. Den bygger på att man ska uppfylla 7 kriterier för att man ska få bli föremål för läkarassisterat självmord. Och det är de här 7 kriterierna. Jag kommer inte att gå igenom dem mera i detalj. Men jag kan säga redan nu att det finns inga svårigheter att kringgå alla de här 7 kriterierna. Som ni alla vet som jobbar i vården så är det då vid varje gång vi ska införa en ny teknik eller nya tillämpningar av medicinska behandlingar så kräver detta att man ska genomgå en riskkonsekvensanalys. Man verkligen ser, är det här säkert system, en säker metod vi inför. Och detta är då särskilt viktigt för verksamheter som har en hög risk, som exempelvis avancerad kirurgi, nya cytostatika med potentiellt allvarliga biverkningar eller andra nya dyra läkemedel. Och förstås också läkemedel till gravida med risk för påverkan på fostret. Och då är det ju så att dödshjälp måste ju då hänföras till kategorin högriskverksamhet. Då konsekvenserna av behandlingen är ju då irreversibel. Och utifrån ett chefläkarperspektiv som jag då representerar så får man ju då fråga sig, uppfyller Oregon-modellen de krav som måste ställas? Och då ska jag redan föregå genom att säga att nej, Oregon-modellen ger inte någon säker död. Enligt Oregon-modellen så erbjuds då läkarassisterat självmord endast till patienter som har ett obotligt sjukdomstillstånd med högst 6 månader överlevnad. Och det vet vi ju, och det här ska bekräftas då av 2 oberoende läkare. Och det vet ju alla som jobbar inom vården hur svårt det är att kunna prognostisera hur lång överlevnad en patient har. Den första bedömningen ska då göras av en läkare som har det primära ansvaret för vård och behandling av patientens terminala sjukdom. Men sen så säger ju inte lagen någonting om vilka läkare som ska konsulteras för en andra bedömning. Det kan alltså vara så, är du en läkare som är positivt inställd till läkarassisterat självmord, då kan du konsultera en kollega med samma inställning. Det finns heller inget krav på att läkaren ska vara specialist i den sjukdomen som patienten terminala sjukdom består av, diagnos. Och det finns heller inget krav att remittera patienten till en specialist. Och sen finns det då heller inget hinder för att om en patient får ett nej, så kan den här patienten söka en annan läkare. Det som man då har konstaterat kallas för så kallad shopping for doctors. Och det finns då en tydlig lista som vi publicerar för i organ där man kan då veta att de här doktorerna är positiva till dödshjälp, de kan ni konsultera. Vidare så ska det då framställas en muntlig begäran om dödshjälp, och det ska framföras vid 2 tillfällen med minst 15 dagars mellanrum. Men alla vi som vet och har arbetat med patienter där vi ger besked om dödlig sjukdom, utlöses detta oftast en krisreaktion. Och skulle då en patient i det här skedet framföra ett önskemål om att få genomföra självmord, så hinner det ju ändra sig. Det vet vi att efterhand som förloppet utvecklar sig så kan ju också patientens inställning ganska tydligt förändras. Och tillåter man då dödshjälp inom den här perioden så kan man faktiskt bidra till att patienten tar sitt liv på helt felaktiga premisser. Ett annat sådant här kriterie ska också vara det att patienten ska vara beslutskompetent, och detta ska då bekräftas av båda läkarna. Och det här är ju nästan ännu svårare än att bedöma överlevnad. Det krävs närmast en psykiatrisk kompetens för att verkligen utröna om en patient är beslutskompetent, eller om det döljer sig till exempel en klinisk depression. När man då tittar på siffror från Oregon så uppges det då att mindre än 4% av patienterna där anges ha bedömts av psykiatriker i rapporterna. Vidare det som också är uttalat och som vi i Sverige är vana vid är att det ska vara väldigt tydlig kontroll och dokumentation. Och enligt Oregon-modellen så är det en uttalat bristande kontroll och dokumentation. Lagen täcker endast in tiden fram till att läkemedlet skrivs ut. Men det finns inga skyddsmekanismer för att säkerställa att patienten är medveten eller intar frivilligt dosen. Det finns heller inget krav på att patienten när man ska ta sitt läkemedel är då beslutsmässigt eller mentalt kompetent. Och det finns heller inget neutralt vittne som måste vara närvarande vid dödstidspunkten. Och i rapporterna från Oregon så visade det sig också att i många fall så fanns det ingen sjukvårdspersonal på plats. Och därför så finns det ju då ingen information journalförs heller avseende hur förloppet gick till. Vi vet väldigt lite om hur det gick till när patienten tog läkemedlet. Vi vet inte vilka komplikationer som tillstötte. Och därför så kan man inte heller i efterförloppet göra en granskning. Och då är det väldigt svårt också att uttala sig om hur säker var den här döden, processen. Och det som också siffror visar sig att det har varit en uttalat stor variation på hur lång tid det tog från att patienten intog läkemedlet till att döden inträffade. Allt från 1 minut till 104 timmar. John var lite inne på det här med rättviseprincipen. Och varför ska vi då tillåta läkarassisterat självmord för bara de som har en terminal sjukdom med död inom prognostiserad död inom 6 månader? Varför ska inte patienter som lider av ett outhärdligt psykiskt lidande förvägras rätten till självmord? Och varför ska dessa exkluderas? Likaså varför ska patienter exkluderas som har ett långsamt fortskridande tillstånd eller andra somatiska tillstånd med ett outhärdligt lidande som går över en längre tidsperiod? Och vad med patienter som själv inte kan inta läkemedlet oralt? Varför ska de då inte få hjälp? Och det kommer ju mer och mer krav på givetvis att de ska få hjälp att genomföra självmordet. Det vill säga, då är vi inne i begreppet eutanasi. Vidare så är det ju så att vi vet redan idag att samhällets resurser för vård och omsorg minskar. Och det kommer att bli och är redan ett ökat behov av att anhöriga träder in och tar över vård och tillsyn av sina närmaste. Och vi vet också att det finns en ovilja hos patienter att vilja lägga familjen till last. Eller så kan det också finnas så att det finns, precis som John berättade, en påtryckning på att personen ska välja att avsluta sitt liv. Och det är också så att om orgonmodellen introduceras så måste den tävla om resurser till all annan sjukvård. Och redan idag så har vi ju bristande resurser till psykiatrin och palliativ vård. Om vi då inför orgonmodellen, vilken garanti har vi då att, nu vänder jag mig idag till beslutsfattare, men att beslutsfattare plötsligt då vill tillskapa mer resurser för att stärka både psykiatrin och den palliativa vården. Jag vill också flika in här, i och med att jag har lite mer tid nu än vad jag hade i förmiddags. Och det är också så att idag utvecklas ju allt mer dyra läkemedel, särläkemedel för ganska sällsynta neurologiska tillstånd. Kommer svenska myndigheter att godkänna att vi får använda dessa läkemedel? Det finns ju läkemedel i pipelinen för ALS. Det finns redan idag för spinal muskelatrofi, för vissa med Duchennes muskeldystrofi. De är dyra, men det är för det här är en ganska liten patientpopulation. Eller kommer det att bli allt mer påtryckningar? Nej, det är bättre att du får avsluta ditt liv. Så att det vi har sett när vi har granskat orgonmodellen är att det som utlovades som betryggande säkerhetsmekanismer visar sig vara tyvärr behäftade med stora svagheter. Och det är särskilt beklämmande då bristfälliga skydd som finns för svaga och utsatta människor, såsom patienter med funktionsnedsättning eller det som lider av depressioner och andra psykiska sjukdomar. Och det oroar mig som redan idag arbetar och möter patienter, både barn, unga och vuxna med medfödda och till dels förvärvade funktionsnedsättningar. Nu när ekonomin begränsas och det blir mer pressat, så redan nu finns det tendenser till att exkludera den här patientgruppen. Och hur lätt är det inte då om dödshjälp legaliseras att man tycker att nej, ert liv är inte så värdefullt. Det är bättre att ni får somna in och det inte kostar så mycket. I bokens sista kapitel så har en av författarna tittat noga på de befintliga internationella dödshjälpsförlagarna och påvisar då att det finns stora brister både när det gäller det här som behövs en otvetydig avgränsning, rättvisa och en försvarbar reglering av dödshjälp. Och det visar sig vara närmast omöjligt att legalisera dödshjälp på ett tydligt, rättvist och ansvarsfullt sätt. Så vår kritik mot läkarassisterat självmord baseras på dels de risker som personer med funktionsnedsättning, äldre och andra utsatta grupper kommer att utsättas för om dödshjälp legaliseras, samt att införandet av assisterat självmord leder till en urholkning av respekten för livet, människors lika värde samt av läkaretiken. Så jag konkluderar med nu, liksom tidigare idag, att dödshjälp bör därför ej legaliseras i Sverige.
Tack så mycket. Då är det så att det finns utrymme lite grann för frågor, men innan vi går in och börjar fråga så skulle Kristna Läkare Medicinare vilja framföra tack. So we will have some questions, but before we go further, we would like to give you very symbolic thanks for all of you three. So Miriam, you have something here.
Yes, just as a token of our gratitude, we would like to offer to our three speakers, if you would please come and stand up here, and we'll give them another round of applause. Thank you. are some small packages, and you will inside, I could reveal they all contain the same, and it is a Orrefors. It's a Swedish glass makery. I don't know if that's the correct word, but it's a candle holder, and I think it's kind of signifies what we've been talking about today, both here and at the Parliament, about keeping the light burning. And also, I sent with you, or we sent with you, two verses from the Bible. One where it says in the Psalms 36 verse 10 that in you we see the light. You are light, and in you we see light. And also from Isaiah chapter 5 verse 20, where it says, Woe to you who make the darkness light and make the light the darkness, and who says this is good to what is evil and this is evil to what is good. So I think we need to remain sharp and clear about that, what is good and not. And thank you all for doing that with your life and with your work here. So, thank you.
So, I know that it's late, but do you have any questions to our three speakers? Is it anything you wonder about? It may be late, so is there hope in a way? Because when you, John, showed us that 1 and 2 and 3 countries, more and more countries in Europe and other parts of the world, they are accepting euthanasia. So what is your opinion? Can we do anything? Is facts enough, or is it just emotions?
No, I think we can. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe we could. I think that the palliative care, at a practical level, I think palliative care, unfortunately, the truth, even in the UK, and the UK is supposed to have the best palliative care services in the world, and yet the truth is that more than 50% of patients die in hospital without specialised palliative care. Many of them die in very bad conditions, often cared for by inexperienced staff. Only 10% of people in the UK die in a specialist hospice. And so I think there is a great deal more to be done in ensuring that everybody in the population has access to excellent care at the end of life. And I think we have a great deal of education, therefore, both for the medical profession, because I'm afraid the majority of doctors have no idea how to care well for a dying person. It's outrageous that we have allowed that to happen, but it is the truth. They can tell you everything about genetics and about sophisticated treatments for cancer and so on, but when it comes to the basic care of how to help someone to die well, they have never been taught, most of them, and they have no knowledge and no interest. And so there is a great deal to be done, I think, in education. Of course, nobody can see the future, but something we are starting to talk about in the UK is if a law was passed to legalise euthanasia in the UK, how could we resist in the new landscape? And what we are talking about is how could we create euthanasia-free zones in the country? How could we, would it be possible to create in the hospitals, in certain departments, in clinics, make it clear that in these departments we do not practice euthanasia? Would it be possible even to persuade the government to fund euthanasia-free services? Or would it be possible for the churches to recreate independent religious or Christian hospitals. If you look in the history of Europe, they were nearly all healthcare was run by the church in the previous eras. Would it be possible in a new era to reinvent Christian or pro-life, Hippocratic hospitals, healthcare? What I can guarantee is if ever those hospitals were created, the public would want to come to them. They're not stupid, and they would know where they would get the best care. So maybe it needs political and organizational innovation. You know, the most wonderful thing about Cicely Saunders was she was confronted with two alternatives, both of which were terrible. When she was practicing in the 1950s, she was watching patients die in agony. So what do you do, doctor? You have two choices. You either watch your patient die in agony or you kill them. What is your choice? Do you do the lesser of two evils? And Cicely Saunders said, no, I will invent a new way of caring, a new response. And you know, I feel that so often this is what we lack. For those of us who are Christian believers, for those of us who are committed to life, we don't lack information, we don't lack education, we don't lack prayer, we don't lack faith. What do we lack? We lack creativity. We lack the ability to think outside the box and do something new. And maybe if euthanasia or assisted suicide is legalized, there is the opportunity for us to be creative and to do something new.
Thank you. So, in your opinion, when working with palliative care, is there young people that want to work with palliative?
Yes. Several of them come from different specialties, like surgeons, cardiologists, and oncologists, of course. So we have many young people that want to work in palliative care.
But is there enough of? I may ask you, Mikaela, during your studies, because you are within a month now becoming a doctor, finalizing your studies. Have you learned a lot of palliative care?
What a great question. I think that we have learned, so we are, quite recently, we have updated the medical program in Sweden across all the different universities. So there are university differences and they've all been updated. So if my answer is not the answer you will get from the new ones, I'd say. But in my university, we have had an informative about the palliative care kit, in Gothenburg. And so I'd say we know what medications to use, and we are quite aware, but I'd say that there is a reluctancy in the medical students and to face the certainty of death, because you're facing your own insecurities as well. And I'd say that, in my recollection, those lectures have always been non-obligatory, or non-mandatory, and it's always been very scarce among seats, so not well-attended lectures. And the ones that are there are mainly those, I'd say, who are quite confident in facing their own death, I'd say. Or that is my view of it. But there could always be more.
So we have one question.
It wasn't really a question, but I was at a conference last week where a family healthcare clinic in Vård in Stockholm talked about a project that they had that was only a few months, I think, where they educated their the doctor and the nurses and undersköterskor who go home to patients to do palliative care at home, but through the family healthcare clinic, which was very successful. So there are, I think, there are options for also getting palliative care, maybe not, of course, without the pumps and everything, just with the panorama at home. So there are probably a lot of options that could be developed so that even healthcare centers can provide a level of palliative care at home. Just, if I have time for a question, is there any evidence in the places where, or do you know, in the places where euthanasia is legal, or what the views on, for example, people with disabilities or chronic disease, if that has changed in any way, or the view of people with mental illness or those kind of problems?
Thanks for the question. I think there's a great deal of concern amongst people with disabilities about the legalization of euthanasia, particularly because people who have chronic disabilities, they are terrified about being admitted to hospital. And the reason they are terrified is that they think that some doctor will decide that their life is not worth living and therefore will not provide them with the proper resuscitation and care. So already many disabled people sense this kind of prejudice and hostility in the medical profession towards, paradoxically. I mean, to me that is so tragic, because a hospital which should be a place of safety, they sense that it is a place of threat, a place that could lead to their death. I think there is anecdotal evidence, certainly, that once euthanasia is legalized, that this prejudice against disabled people can increase. And certainly there are cases reported in Canada where there are people with chronic disability who have been trying to persuade the social services or the medical services to provide the resources they need in order to have proper care, and the state has said, no, we will not provide those resources. It's not possible for us to provide those resources, but you do meet the criteria for euthanasia, so that we will provide that service for you if you would like it. And there have been cases where people with disabilities have received euthanasia simply because it's not impossible to provide the care they need. So I think those concerns are very real, and certainly in the UK there is a network of people against euthanasia, which includes palliative care doctors, people from religious groups, and people with disabilities who are strongly fighting together to prevent this from being legalized.
I would like to tell you something, and sorry John, I'm going to say this in Swedish. I think it's a little bit more easier. Jag är registerhållare för ett nationellt kvalitetsregister för neuromuskulära sjukdomar. Och vi ingår i Neuro, en stor plattform där vi 11 delregister, där bland annat register för ALS ligger, MS, Parkinson, epilepsi och så vidare. Och på ett av styrgruppsmötena strax efter att Staffan Bergström beredde läkarassisterad självmord för en ALS-sjuk patient, så lyfte vi av patientrepresentanter också med från Neuro, patientföreningen, i styrgruppen. Lyfte då frågan att, ni förstår ju att vi var ju tvungna att agera, det här var så förskräckligt att det här fick hända. Hon var väldigt upprörd, och då blev det här intressant. Och då satte det igång en väldigt bra diskussion, för hon som var kvalitetsregisterhållare för ALS-registret direkt sa att det här var förfärligt. Och jag uttalade mig i pressen mot det här. Och alla registerhållare, det vill säga alla representerar då specialister som jobbar nära patienter med de här sjukdomarna. Det fanns inte en enda som öppnade sin mun och talade för dödshjälp. Och så tycker jag det många gånger är att jobbar man nära en patientgrupp med särskild sjukdom så har man en speciell kunskap. De som jobbar allt längre bort har mindre kunskap. Och då fick jag ju möjligheten, för då hade vi ju gett ut vår bok. Så då sa jag bara att jag skulle bara passa på att tipsa om den här boken, och den finns tillgänglig på Open Access och så vidare. Och direkt, skicka oss länken, lägg den i chatten så vi, för det här var ett digitalt möte. Vi kan få med den i minnesanteckningarna, var jättebra. Så jag tror också det här att kan vi få engagerat doktorer, våra kollegor som arbetar nära utsatta grupper, så tror jag det också skulle främja patientvården och arbeta mot legalisering av dödshjälp. Och jag tänker bara på min egen specialitet, barnneurologi, och mina medarbetare och även vuxenhabiliteringen. Det finns inte någon som jag har hört aktivt, där vi har haft diskussioner och talar för dödshjälp. Jag berättade för min närmaste chef, hon är förvaltningschef för vår förvaltning, habilitering och hälsa. Jag var tvungen att berätta att jag skulle åka till riksdagen idag och så. Vad skulle jag då? Då berättade jag att vi skulle ha ett seminarium och så vidare. Och hennes reaktion var, vad bra! Ja, detta måste vi ha med som information på hemsidan. Tänkte jag, yes, rätt inställning. För hon är ju medveten om att våra målgrupper är ju utsatta. Så att jag tror det här med att vi behöver föra ut information och verka genom våra olika nätverk.
Jag kan säga det också att bland palliativläkare eller bland överhuvudtaget personal i palliativ vård så finns det finns säkert några, men jag har aldrig stött på någon som är positiv till dödshjälp. Det har varit några gånger folk som har börjat och kommit till oss med inställningen att dödshjälp är väl en bra idé för de som har jättesvår smärta. Och jag minns väldigt väl en sköterska som sa att tyckte absolut att det var det som man borde göra. Men nu har jag ju sett vad ni kan göra. Nu har jag ju sett vilken hjälp det går att få. Så nu förstår jag att nej, vi ska inte ha dödshjälp.
John, do you want
to just make a comment? One of the really sad things that is now becoming apparent in Canada and also I think in one or two other countries where euthanasia is legalized, and that is the corruption of palliative care. So before euthanasia is legalized, I think almost universally the palliative care specialists are opposed to euthanasia. But what has happened in Canada, first there has been pressure from the authorities that this is a legal service which if patient requests, you have a duty to provide. And then what has happened is there have been cases where a patient who is under the palliative care services in a palliative care department has requested euthanasia. Now I remember reading one case where the patient requested euthanasia, the palliative care doctor said absolutely no way, this is not part of we don't do this, we will provide care but we will not kill you. And then the patient on the telephone found a doctor, a euthanasia doctor, who was prepared to do it. And then the patient discharged himself from the palliative care service. And I think I'm true in saying that the euthanasia was carried out in a bus shelter down the road from the hospital. And the palliative care services heard about this, there was a big scandal about it. The next time that this happened, another patient said, I wish to receive euthanasia. And the palliative care doctor said, well, that was so terrible what happened last time. At least we will allow the euthanasia doctor to come into our clinic to perform the procedure. And so the euthanasia doctor came and killed the patient in the palliative care. And then the next time the doctor said, well, why do we need to get this foreign doctor who knows nothing about us, knows nothing about the patient? You know, at least it would be better that a doctor who knows the patient does the treatment. And so now what is happening in many palliative care services in Canada is they do both. You can choose. If you want palliative care, we'll give you palliative care. If you want euthanasia, you can have euthanasia. It's choice. What's wrong with choice? And so that's the danger, how the service can become corrupted by the fact that this is now legal. and available.
What happens in these countries when the doctors regret? When the doctors regret to kill the patients?
They're sent for counselling.
The doctors?
The doctor are sent for counselling. Because the emotional impact on doctors is very great. There is this very deep, it is a kind of moral, a sense of having overcome a moral boundary. You know, this is part of the moral order of creation, that we do not kill, and yet they have overcome this boundary. And it leads to deep concern for many. I read the account of a family physician in Holland who had performed a number of cases of euthanasia. In Holland, it's mainly performed by family physicians and mainly in the home, the patient's home. And he said that when my patient, I hate doing it, he says, it's horrible. When my patient asks for it, I always say, no, let's not talk about it now, let's talk about something else. But he says, eventually, once the pressure is too great, I always arrange to do it on a Friday afternoon. And then I go to the home. In fact, in other recommendations have said that doctors should not drive themselves to the home when they are going to do euthanasia. They should always have another driver, because the experience is they have a high risk of an accident. He says, I go to the home, I do the deed, I sign the forms, I inform the coroner, and then I go for long walks in the forest. I listen to a lot of Bach, I read Goethe, and I try to get myself in a position to go back to work on Monday. So this is just sort of indicative of what we are doing to our fellow professionals who are part of this. And yet, I remember talking to a young junior doctor in the Netherlands, and we were talking like this, and he said to me, do you think it is possible for me to refuse to do euthanasia? Do you think that would be possible? And I said, of course, you don't have to do this. He said, but the pressure is so great, it's just not possible for us to refuse. So it is the implications. Once the law is there, you actually need to have a reason to carry on living. A similar thing happened once abortion is legalized. You need a reason to continue the pregnancy. Why are you carrying on? Don't you know what's available? Why are you carrying on living? There is a solution. We have the solution. So it changes the whole nature of society and medicine.
So I would say, to summarize, that I think we have to...
There's a question in the back.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank you all for very nice presentations, very informative, and also organizers for fixing this evening. And I'm very grateful that you're doing this work. It's so important, and I do hope that we, both in Britain and here in Sweden, will stop this legalization. But if we don't, what might happen? Will we doctors who don't want to kill our patients be able to say no? I read at some place, you probably know where it was, I have forgotten, but it was about doctors who would not like to kill their patients. They would have to send the patients to another doctor that would like to do it. So it's the doctor's responsibility to fix it for the patient. And not only that, also that you, when you meet the patient for the first time, you have to tell the patient, well, you know, if you would like to die, I wouldn't help you. So that some kind of I don't remember the English name of it, but information consent, something like that. So there would be a sign in the reception, oh, Dr. Alvin, he's not helping you at the end. So don't choose him. Take this one, he will help you.
Yeah.
And what do you think? I would like to hear your comment about this. Is this a coming problem, and if so, how could we stop it?
Thank you. It's genuinely a very real problem, and different systems have tried to find methods. We have these strange doctors who don't like killing people, and they're a real problem to us, but somehow we have to find a way to incorporate them. So in Canada, because euthanasia is integrated into the main health service, it is something that happens within state hospitals as an integrated part of the care pathway. What's happened in many hospitals is that they have divided people into A group, B group, and C group. These are doctors. A group are the doctors who refuse to do anything, refuse to have anything to do with euthanasia. They must refer the patient to the B group doctors. The B group doctors are doctors who are prepared to talk about euthanasia and counsel patients, but they are not prepared to do the deed. So the B group doctors will talk to the patient and will explain to them the options, and do they really want to do this, and have they considered palliative care, and so on. And if the patient says yes, then the B group doctor must refer the patient to the C group doctors, who are the doctors who are actually prepared to do the killing. And in this way, everyone is happy. Unfortunately, there are medical students and doctors who are finding even this so corrupting. You know, how can I work in a system where my patient, who I'm caring for, could be killed tomorrow or in the next few weeks? How can I belong to this system which is doing this? Vulnerable people are being coerced. Or can I say, I cannot practice medicine? So again, I think this is where we need the creativity, and to say to the parliaments, this is wrong. You know, I think a phrase which I think is a useful phrase, although it's a violent phrase, and this is this: when you force someone by state law to do something that they believe profoundly is wrong, it is a rape of the heart. You are raping us, our moral integrity. You are using state force to make us do things which are completely repugnant to us. And that is wrong. To use state power to violate well-meaning health professionals is wrong. I think if we made that case forcefully and argued it and explained it, I think there would be many people out there who would say that's wrong. We mustn't do that. And of course, what kind of doctor do you want? Do you want a doctor who's been raped? Do you want a doctor who's been violated, who's been forced? Or would you prefer to have a doctor who was able to do what they believe is right? And I think the general public would understand that too. So I think we need to make this case. We need to find ways of presenting the case, not saying we're doctors, as though we are just standing on our rights, but explaining how important it is that the state does not violate these deep, deep moral commitments that we have.
So I would like to summarize. So I believe that today is really the day where we have to be engaged in these things. Yesterday, those that were for euthanasia were in the parliament. So I think I can foresee the coming year that it will be a lot of debate, and we have, each of us, to read and try to get more facts and to stand up for the ethics and the combination of the Greek and the Christian way of seeing to be devoted as doctors. So I would encourage you all to be engaged in this, and please come to us that are in the lead at Christian doctors and see if you want to be engaged more, because we need you all. I think we have to be more in the debate in a fair way, but still be engaged. So we close here, but we have time to please take fruits or water and so on, and talk with each other. And you that need to